Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, we got myself and we got the Headless Giant today. Headless, let everybody know what is up with your show and when they can find your stuff, just in case a new listener is coming across the show.
Well, I've just got off of restrictions, so now I'm back on X. So if you want to check out my show, I did one yesterday with a friend of mine named Matt. We were talking about poetic religions versus the more top-down religions, and I think we covered a lot of issues. But you can start to track it throughout history and get a better feel for it through that kind of thing. So thanks for having me.
Of course. And your show, too. You mentioned it, right? Or
yeah, Headless Giant Podcast. Check that out on YouTube and Twitter, yep.
Awesome. And we got Nick from Hayes Reviews. I actually came across him I think organically. Nobody told me about him. I think he came up as a suggestion because of things that I was watching on YouTube. And at first, honestly, I thought it was Odd Man. And I was like, oh, wait, no, that's somebody else. And then I was like, yo, and the reason why too is because the last time, well, I mean, it was the only time I think I ever really touched on the Fabian Society. I had Odd Man on. I mean, this is like 3 years ago. So I guess that clicked in my head, and I was like, oh no, that's not him. And I checked out one of your episodes, and I was like, damn, I was like, this is pretty interesting. The guy reads the books and then covers them, and I was like, kind of like Jack Allen and Odd Man style. And I was like, I could really go for that. I appreciate that style. And I think there's definitely something to get out of that, And in my opinion, I think that takes a lot of time and just a lot of energy from the podcaster. So it's an impressive thing. So I hit him up and he actually got right back to me and we finally made it happen. Nick, let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find your show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So my show is Hayes Reviews, and you can find that on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. I only recently added the Rumble and the Odyssey, so it's most of the videos are up on YouTube. Most of the subscribers and the action is there. But basically, all I do is I get into the books. What I was seeing over the last few years was a lot of censorship, a lot of deplatforming. Headless, you just mentioned you're back, after a hiatus. You've been in the naughty room on the naughty step thinking about the things you said. So I saw that going on, and I thought, okay, what's the best hedge against this? And I was listening to different people who were talking about books. Jay Dyer is a good example, or Richard Grove. And every time they mentioned a book, I thought, right, I'll just see how much it is and if I can grab a copy. And then I slowly but surely built up this library, and then I thought, I got to get this out there, and I need to read them, and I can. Why not just film it, get it on camera, and have a sort of interactive learning experience for the audience, and then it's grown a little bit, and organically, like you said, Nick. I haven't had everything's just been organic, just commenting on other people's stuff and talking to them and finding other like-minded folk who are interested in what I do. And I think in the era we live in, where there's so much misinformation and disinformation, it's nice to have something tangible to rely on. Have a look in the books. They're physical. They are something that you can actually refer to and look at when we're surfing the web, which is ever changing and kind of disintegrating before our very eyes. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm very looking forward to the conversation today.
Of course. Yeah, sure. A quick question. How's Odyssey working out for you?
It works. My stuff goes out there. There doesn't seem to be much going on in terms of growth of the channel or organic traffic, really. Right. So it's going on there, and I suppose it's more of a safety net as a backup in case I get booted off somewhere else. Then I can at least say, well, it's still over there, so you can get it.
Yeah, I remember when I first went on there 4 years ago, it seemed to have some traction, but again, that was also really around high censorship times. So I think maybe that had something to do with it. And then I think I lost it or forgot the password or whatever. I stopped using it for 2 years and then went back and made a new account. And I was like, oh, I'm just getting nowhere with this. I don't even stream out to it anymore. But I've heard of some people getting good stuff out of Odyssey. It just didn't work for me. Unfortunately, I got BitChute and Rumble, and you can stream now to BitChute live. So.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that was a function.
Do that right now, actually. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out to BitChute.
Yeah. What else? Oh, so what I guess we'll get into kind of the topic or whatever, the Fabian Society. What made you, I guess, either pick that topic or I guess pick the book? What made you even get into covering this one?
Oh, so this one came. So I didn't know about this book, and I'd been following Richard Grove's work. And if you guys are familiar with him, he came up with his publishing company, Tragedy and Hope, which is named after this big book over here over my shoulder. You might be able to see. And the Tragedy and Hope is by Carol Quigley, and it's this monster of a book. But he was the official historian for the Council on Foreign Relations. And so when you're learning about these kind of think tanks and these organizations who wield power, but they do it off stage, let's say, it's very interesting to know that they had an official historian who wrote this whole book by diving into their archives and looking at their papers, you know. And so Richard Grove is an inspiration for me, and I buy a lot of the books he gets. But then from Tragedy and Hope, I was looking at Jay Dyer's work because he covered it too, and he has this great lecture series on Tragedy and Hope. And he mentioned another book. And this is going to get us there, but he mentioned this one, which is the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. Okay. And I thought, okay, I'm familiar with the Milner side of this because that's Lord Milner. You're not? Okay. Lord Milner, and he's working with Cecil Rhodes, and they go back all the way to the Balfour Declaration and it's kind of the Round Table groups, and Cecil Rhodes's will is a whole story. That's
South
really
African apartheid.
There you go. Yeah, we pioneered the use of concentration camps, and then in this book, the author whose name I should show, I don't even know how to pronounce this dude, Ioan Ratu, I think. And he mentions that this work is a continuation of Carol Quigley's work and Fabian Freeway by Rose Martin. And I thought, okay, I got to get this Fabian Freeway book. So I jumped online, I found a copy. And then the reason we started looking at it and reading it is because I have a Telegram group. And what I do is when I finish a book, I'll pick 3 more and I'll put it out to the group as a poll. And then we'll all take a vote and decide what to read next. So this one came out on top. So that's why we dived into it.
Nice. Were you interested in I'm assuming you probably knew, obviously, like you were just saying about that other book, you were already kind of hip to like the Fabian Society before you even got into that?
I'd heard a little bit, here and there. The famous thing about them is that they're, as you saw on the thumbnail, the wolf in sheep's clothing as their emblem. And it's almost like hard to believe that they picked that, But they did, and they immortalized it in a stained glass window. So there you have it.
Sometimes I wonder, it's like, we do that so like people we told you so. I mean, not to even I guess it really doesn't make a difference to you because you're not in the United States, but maybe you do have a certain political preference for us. But I mean, again, I shit on both sides when it comes to politics, but it's like I've even thought that about like Trump and his snake speech. It's like, how many times are you going to tell people this thing? It's like, what are you trying to tell us that this is you? Sometimes you have to wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about the two-party politics as well is I always say I agree with both sides because and what I agree with is the criticisms of the other side that come from both sides,
Right? That is a really good way to put it. That I can say I probably agree with. Yeah. Their criticism, yeah, I agree with that, but the way they handle it or their way of solving the problem still doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah. Damn. And I know Headless, you said you've been pretty big into like the Fabian Society stuff.
Oh yeah. So especially with Richard Grove really kind of opened my eyes to a bunch of the British influences in American politics. And it's funny, the Fabian socialist sort of strategy is still the General Fabian strategy from back in Rome. What they would do is they would attack a much larger enemy by wearing them down and getting them to use all of their resources in chasing you and basically, it's just like what they used in Iraq. And it's funny because you've got Tony Blair up there committing British troops to Iraq, and he's part of the Fabian Society. So he knows exactly what's going to happen because all of the insurgents use this Fabian strategy as well. So like you get this constant loop of people, falling into, I think intentionally, this trap of trying to, recreate the world as they see it, as they want it to be, and not actually understanding that it's already been tried. It's not going to have any different results. But, who knows what the end game is. But at this point, it's like it's really hard to deny the British influence over American politics at this point. And Richard Grove does an exhaustive job on his Tragedy and Hope series, and also his Grand Theft World. Every week he has a 6-hour-long podcast where he goes over recent events and gives historical context. I have to listen to it at like 2x speed to get through it in a day. But it's a lot of historical context, and especially with the recent conflict going on in Israel, it's like you don't know half the things that are going on behind the scenes, but it's starting to trickle out in really interesting ways. And I don't think there's any going back from the precipice at this point. Either you know exactly what the history is, or you're just lost in the sauce. They're not going to give you any of the solutions.
Yeah, well said. Very well said.
Yeah.
For sure. The thing that blew my mind, and I think if you're interested in the influence in America, then this book is a really good one to get, because the first 100 pages, part one, is about Great Britain. It's about their first meeting, right? And their first meeting was in 1884, and it was a small group of people, and they were middle class, and they were bored, and they were atheist, and they didn't like their jobs, and they thought, do you know what? We like that communism thing that's going on. Let's bring that over to England, right? And the irony is that they're all wealthy because of free market capitalism and business and industry. But they decide they're going to bring communism over. And then the first part of the book tells you about their initial meetings and how they infiltrated the political system here in the UK. And they actually led to the formation of the British Labour Party, which today is still one of the two main. It's the Red Party and the Red-Blue game, political game. And they had a huge role in the formation of that party, which blew my mind. But then the second part of the book, which is about the next 300 pages, is all about how they went over to America and how they influenced America and how they got into the minds of the young, and they got into the minds of students and universities and campuses. Very, very similar to what's going on in the present day. And one of the sort of echoes that's echoing in the present day that blew my mind is right at the beginning of the book. She talks about how she wrote this in 1966, and she talks about how anyone who was critical of socialism or communism would get labeled a right-wing extremist. And I was like, dude, they're doing the same thing today. They're just labeling anyone. If you want to be traditional and maybe grow like food and get married and have children and be Christian, it's like, oh, you're a right-wing extremist if you're not into all the rainbow stuff and if you're not into all the, so very, just very aligned with what we're going through now. And she talks about in the book about how these demonstrations would occur on university campuses helped out by communists, for example, and you read it and you're like, oh my God, this is 60 years ago she was writing this, but it's the same thing that's going on today. So an incredibly good book to see. If you want to understand why America is the way it is right now, this book is a really key part of the puzzle, I would say.
Were you like reading that book and being like, my God, I see this happening now?
Yeah, because the way I think of my show sometimes is that, people do these like reaction videos where they'll watch them, like them watching a video. I'm doing reaction videos, but to books, know. So sometimes it's dry and boring and not a lot, but every now and again you come across some juicy little nugget and it's like, what the fuck did I just read?
Well, here's a juicy little nugget. So the Fabian Society basically started at a seance. So all of these middle-class people are attending a seance. This is the height of what's it called? Theosophy.
Oh,
well, yeah. It was a uniting of theosophy and spiritualism, because that was sort of under the same umbrella.
Yeah.
And within that, this was the new thing. Everybody goes to these things. This is sort of a subversive thing. They're not Christians. Obviously, they are, atheistic, but they're still going to these, seances. And so how do these atheists believe in this life after death stuff if they're atheists? Really, it's just a networking game. And that's what the Fabian Society really helped promote, is this idea of networking to get into power. And in America, they created the Council on Foreign Relations, which has everything to do with American foreign policy today. And, you get the Council on Foreign Relations documents. That's exactly where Carol Quigley was operating out of. So the Fabian Society, Council on Foreign Relations, Federal Reserve, all the rest of it come from this same sort of set of people.
Yeah, exactly. And they refer to it. You hit the nail on the head when you say networking, because they refer to it as, there's two words they use. One is penetration and one is permeation. right? So I did a short, I was making this joke comparing them to Klaus Schwab with his penetrate the cabinets, you know? Yeah. And so, but they said they like to permeate. So they were permeating unions, workers' unions, and permeating universities and local groups. And they would quite happily ally themselves with any group, religious or not. You know, the point that because they work in the long game, it's like get in there and change it from within over decades. That's really the game that they play. And so, yeah, networking is a key part of it. And then the other thing that they do is they keep rebranding themselves all the time. So what we learned about with regards to America was groups like so they had the ISS, right? Not the International Space Station. It's the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. Now, in the 1920s or so, when the famines were going on in Russia, people are looking over there and going, that socialism, communism thing seems to be causing a lot of dead people. They rebranded themselves, the ISS. They thought they don't want to have socialism in the name, right? So they rebranded themselves to the LID, the League for Industrial Democracy, right? So you learn about these organizations and they shift and they morph and they change, but it's the same people, it's the same ideology, it's the same goals, but according to the times and who they're dealing with, they have to wear a different, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, but sometimes, they take that sheep's clothing off and put
maybe that's a democracy Biden keeps going on about.
Right.
I don't understand. like this doesn't make any sense, dude.
Well, even their new symbol, because after they got heat for that wolf in sheep's clothing, they switched it over to a turtle striking the planet. And it's like, what are you trying to say? Well, they're just taking their time. So a lot of leftists will say that Fabian socialism isn't real socialism because it's just communism for the wealthy. But then you have to ask yourself, what isn't communism for the wealthy? Because you look at the results of socialism and it always benefits the highest, echelons of society and hurts the lowest. So, where is this real socialism we keep hearing so much about? And it's interesting too. The whole idea of socialism at the turn of the century was a fashion statement. Everybody was calling themselves a socialist, and so they were just riding that wave of everybody's a socialist now.
Yep. And then when it wasn't trendy and wasn't in vogue anymore, then it became democracy or industrial democracy, as Sidney and Beatrice Webb talked about it. But I just want to go back briefly to the point you made about them meeting at a seance, right? Because I found another very interesting connection unexpectedly. And I was reading this book, From Hell. Have you seen this one before? The Alan Moore graphic novel. It's all about Jack the Ripper.
Movie. Oh, is that what the movie is?
Yeah.
So the movie is, I think, leaves a lot of stuff out or isn't quite really faithful. But this is around the same time that they first met, the Fabian Socialists first met, which is 1884. This is all going on. And in this book, there's a character called, I think he's called James Lee. And he was a medium. And he was actually became the medium to Queen Victoria as a young man. And he was 19 or 20 years old. And he could communicate to Prince Albert. And he was relaying messages from the beyond to Queen Victoria. And he's in this book. It's a fictionalized account of those murders. But in the notes at the back of the book, the kind of annotations to the chapters, it claims that he was a socialist and he was a member of the Fabian Society. And I was like, wow, that's very curious. So, but I can't find any reference to him. It doesn't mention Fabian on Wikipedia, and he's not in any of the other Fabian books I have about the group. But it's just interesting that he is a medium and a psychic, or claimed to be. In the book, they made him out to be a fraud, and he was just acting. But there was no evidence for that. That wasn't a sort of historically accurate thing. But yeah, just a curious link there.
Another curious link is, I think his name is Brandon Bracken. Have you heard of this guy? So this is the inspiration for Big Brother in 1984. He was the British media minister from World War II. And they think that this was the direct boss of George Orwell while he was working at the BBC. And so this guy was the Minister of Information. And, he was also in charge of the BBC and everything else. And so this Big Brother character comes from a Fabian socialist member of the British, Parliament, as he was this role as, the information czar. So once you understand that, you get a real good picture of what George Orwell was trying to say. These communists for the wealthy were trying to brainwash people. You know, that's exactly what they do, is they get in power and then they brainwash the population.
Yeah. And that's and the tragedy of it is, in a way, or not the tragedy, but the insidious nature of it is that they brainwash people by appealing to their sense of justice and virtue and decency and honor and their innate desire to help people and see fairness in the world. And they say that that's what they're going to bring, and they promise that, but of course it never gets delivered.
Right. It's always this broken promise thing that just keeps going generation after generation, because people don't want to see themselves as bad. I can't be the bad guy. And we see that in our media too. It's like, why would they show people the Matrix if it lets them know that they're not living in a real world? Well, you see, the good guy always wins in the Matrix. And, you know, the Keanu Reeves character is sort of this blank face, right? So anybody could go in that role, and there's no real like extreme emotion. Like, he doesn't have a lot of extreme emotions in any of his roles. So he's the ultimate sort of blank face character that you can project yourself onto. And, you know, he always wins in the end. So anything you believe is right, and we're going to appeal to that side of you to, you know, bring out this justice and fairness, which never actually equals justice and fairness. And as you sort of have this rich imaginary life that's coming from the media as they're putting it into you, the output is exactly what they want to get out of you. And we see that, you know, sort of exemplified in all of these conflicts that are coming home today. Now everybody wants to choose a side in Israel versus Palestine. They're not thinking about their own homeland.
Right. Very well said. Very well put. Yeah. And you end up being the battery that they say you are in the film, right?
Right. You just can't admit that, because once you do, you're the bad guy, and nobody wants to admit that they're the baddies.
It's like wrestling. You always need a bad guy, though.
Right.
It's exactly what watching politics is like nowadays. Wrestling.
I always compare it to that.
Yeah.
Every time. It's a kind of a scripted show for people to believe that they're witnessing something. They're witnessing democracy, right? That's what they think they're witnessing, and it's just a pantomime.
And it's so easy too. It's like people assume that it takes a lot of bravery to come forward and say things on the House floor, but really it's just a competition for attention. And so we haven't even really gotten into the real extreme forms of it yet, but we're definitely nosediving into it. We're going to see a lot more brash statements coming out and people being like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's just to get your attention. It's just to get your focus away from, you know, more pressing matters and onto the national and global stage.
Yeah, I really do think, especially like on the right does it too in their own ways, but on the left, like you got AOC and like one or two other chicks over there. I think they understand fully when they're acting like an asshole that they're doing that.
Right.
They're just getting the attention. They want to just stick out in people's heads. They need to keep their name relevant. You know, so like I think they fully understand what they're doing. And it may seem like, oh my God, that bitch is crazy. Besides that, they probably are. It's just that they don't give any fucks because they just are looking to get attention. And this works. You know,
right? The government wouldn't have the ability to control your mind if you didn't give it any attention. It just wouldn't. You know,
if 20 people talked and one of them ranted and raved, I'm sure that one will make the news. You know what I'm saying? So,
and all the headlines will be about the ranter and the raver, and not the people with the sensible ideas, with the good analysis, with the historical context, with the actual knowledge to run a country or a society or an economy. No, they won't get on the headlines because it's all about eyeballs. It's all the attention economy now, isn't it? So it's really about like how much attention, likes, shares can we get? How much outrage, vitriol? How can we fire people up? And they'll type angrily and furiously into a little black device, little black square, and actually do nothing to change things and improve things. Because like you were saying, you get this false sense of accomplishment when actually what you need to do is take a good long look in the mirror. Michael Jackson told us, man in the mirror. You know, if you want to make a change, start with the man in the mirror. You got to look in the mirror and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? What can I change? Who do I need to become? What kind of person do I have to be? What kind of relationships do I have to build? What kind of things do I have to produce in my life? And instead it's like, share this and get angry at that, and shit post online, and I'm changing the world for the better. It's like, well, not sure about that.
Not too, and again, actually, I guess this might have some context, because I was saying not to get too off the topic, because I think what you were saying right there is very important when I add to it too. In my opinion, like even when I said earlier, like I feel like sometimes, like when we're talking about maybe ideas with the Fabian Society and what they wanted to do, it's like, oh geez, I could see this happening now. That was like kind of, I guess, one of the reasons why I think we had touched on it in the past, is because like I do see, to me, it seems like a very far left agenda. Not saying the right isn't involved, but I'm just saying that seems to be like kind of evident to me. And I have always thought that like part of like the last few years with the whole digital army, it's not doing jack shit. I hate to tell you that. It's like due to, unfortunately, anonymous, which who knows if that was even authentic or that wasn't kind of devised to begin with. Due to them hacking a few places, sometimes it seems like people got this idea that you can be a keyboard warrior. And that continued on through Q. And it's just basically like you're just sitting in your house doing nothing, thinking you're saving the world, and everything just keeps going. So it's like the right's basically keeping you like doing nothing, and the left just keeps plowing through.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to say that it's a left, because it does come from a left-leaning sort of agenda, particularly in the UK, the British Labour Party that I mentioned earlier. That's the left party, even though it's red. I know it's kind of the other way around for you guys, isn't it? The left party is blue, but Pepsi Cola, you know what I mean? But what they really do very well is they grow the bureaucracy. And so there's a fact very early on in the book that says, it says something like the number. So in sort of the 1930s, you guys in America had something like 600,000 federal employees, right? And then by the 1960s, there was 2.5 million. So this is the agenda. It's to like bloat up the bureaucracy and make it convoluted and require more regulation and laws and permits and passes and permissions for things, and just kind of gradually suffocate any industry or freedom with all this hoop jumping, where you can't do anything because you got to fill out 46 forms and get it verified and stamped, and all that's moved on to the electronic world now. So now, if you want to speak to a human being, you often can't, because it's just an automated messaging system. Press number whatever to get through, or you got to fill out things and digital sign copies of things. So we're being moved more and more, whether it's activism or genuine political engagement, or just the general day-to-day administration of your life. It's all being pushed into this digital realm, this digital world. And that divorces people from the actual reality. Like how many people, I don't know about you guys, but how many people know their neighbors or have communities around them with the real people in their lives that they walk past every day and see out the window and whatnot. So I think that's part of the plan. I do.
And I think that's a really good point, because like me and like a few other people happen to be talking about it, I think before a show one day. And I think we're all like, that really kind of makes sense. Like, and they all believed it too. I really hate to say it, but like when it comes to, this is just my opinion, I guess all of their opinions too. Not like, when it comes to conspiracy people, like, conspiracy minded people on social media, that is really such a small fucking percent of people you're even preaching. I hate to say it. I really hate to say it. So it's like you're really only making a difference in the same vacuum.
Yeah. It's the echo chamber.
It's just like now you're all just fighting for each other's attention on who's got the better post or the better.
Right.
It's really like, to say it. It's not like I don't know. It's a very small percentage.
Unless you live within proximity of like 3 other, conspiracy theorists, and you're actually, hitting the streets, you're just talking to the same group of people, and even if you're hitting the streets, you've set up a dichotomy, and the people are used to this dichotomy where whoever's protesting anything is wrong. So I remember back in 2008, we had a big protest out in front of the Federal Reserve, and the people who were attacking us then were Republicans. And it's funny because after that point, they sort of, kind of got the picture that it was not, an America First institution. They've gotten that picture, but they have no idea what to do about it, and, we keep going through these cycles of, well, yeah, you were right, but what do we do about it? And, you keep going to that point, and you actually have to do something in regards to this. And I don't think people are comfortable with non-political actions, right? They've always got to have this guy to elect as their emperor, that's going to get everything done. But they're not willing to actually take non-political action in their own lives to say, well, maybe we should plan on this reaction happening. And so using that reaction, because this is, again, the problem reaction solution that Fabian Society always uses, we can actually push our agenda forward some. And they don't have that ability because all they're thinking about is who's the next elected guy that we can put in power. And he's going to fix everything.
Vote harder.
Right.
Well, that's part of the reason why I like to focus on the books and kind of pitch things more as like, this is history, because, it is like, Headless with Richard Grove, incredibly well documented picture of history. And he's got the book cam on Grand Theft World. I got my little book cam here.
Nice.
Yeah. Not using it today though, but he's got the book cam and he'll show you, and he's highlighted it. He's put the tabs in. To me, that is the way to bridge that gap between, the conspiracy folk over here who are into the reptilian shape-shifting lizard people from Saturn's hexagon or whatever, and the people over here who are just kind of like, something's not right. What the hell's going on? But I don't want to listen to, David Icke or Jordan Maxwell or somebody like that. Now, I really like to kind of merge all of it. Like, for example, Nick, I was listening to you, I think it was the Red Heifer episode, and you were doing some gematria on some of the terms and and I was like, I'd like to see the gematria on some of these like 3 and 4 letter institutes that I was mentioning earlier, like the ISS and the LID, and there's another one, the ADA, it's something like Americans for Democratic Action. Just out of interest, because for me, it's like, let's try and knit it all together and not discount any of it. But I think the way to get to the people who are not conspiracy minded or leaning towards it is to be like, look, this is history. Like, how can you know where you are in life if you don't know the history of how you got here? So that's kind of how I'd pitch it, and that's how I try and frame what I do. It's more like history for nerds, people who don't want to read the books themselves. I'll do it for you.
That's awesome. Something I did want to ask you, throughout, like, you, I guess, kind of like, well, one, reading this book, and maybe just your interest in covering the Fabian Society. And the reason why I wanted to ask you is because, like, I know you're really not like an occultist or into the occult, like Headless and Lux was when I had covered it in the past. Did you think, like, from your experience, do you think that there's like some sort of that's involved in there, occultism and shit like that?
Well, as you mentioned, Headless, the theosophy was mentioned at the start of the book, but she mentions it as a fad that died out after 2 decades. But we know that theosophy went on to be the undergirding philosophy and religion of the UN to this day, right? So what I got was another book, which is I think it's in this one, which is Margaret Cole, The Story of Fabian Socialism, and she talks about Annie Besant. Is that a name familiar to you? I think she was pretty like one of the original theosophists. So the sense I get is that they rejected Christianity. They've rejected but you can't just reject it and then leave and then have that space remain empty. Something is going to fill it, and so either you choose to fill it or something fills it. And the thing that's going to fill it without you choosing is probably not going to be anything good.
So interesting, considering it's like very Gnostic, and it's like that's kind of a mix of Christianity and Catholicism with occultism in a sense.
Right. Well, I think the stated goal of theosophy was to combine all the world's religions into one thing. And basically, if they're the ones who get to pick and choose what goes into that thing, then it starts to, make the picture they want from society. And unfortunately, you look at the people picking and choosing these elements, and you don't get any of the values that were associated with those religions, but you do get a lot of the iconography. And so what they're trying to do is use the iconography as kind of a Trojan horse, right? So that Trojan horse of iconography gives you this new blended mix of all sorts of other concepts mixed in with your Christianity. And the perfect example of that would be General Flynn, right? So General Flynn gets up in front of an audience and does the sevenfold prayer. And, everybody's like, well, what is this? Why am I having to repeat all this stuff? And that comes directly out of Theosophy. And he's Trump's guy, right? I mean, he went on a tour recently all over the Midwest trying to get everybody to vote for Trump. And he's a theosophist. So it's how do you get out of the system when all the leaders you're presented are sort of this sort of theosophical Kabbalistic mix? And you don't really get any answers from that, because everybody you see on television has been chosen to be on television. And that's something that everybody has a hard time dealing with. All of them have been chosen to be on television to some capacity. And if they didn't go along with it to some capacity, they wouldn't be there.
100%. Yeah. I think it's a really critical point you just made. I try and say that to everyone I meet. That's a tough one to get through to people, for sure.
And you know why, like, I had even asked about like the occult aspect is, a little bit before when I was saying about kind of like one side being submissive because they think like something's going to come and save them. Sometimes I do think like that's, you gotta be a magician to pull off like that masses to start believing that stuff. And like what you were just saying about Michael Flynn Headless, I mean, I remember when that came out, I had seen something about it and like sent it to Lux. And I was like, yo, I've even heard of that. I may not have known it, but I've heard of that name within, magic and while I was like studying and in the OTO. And like 5 minutes later, he sends me like a link or a screenshot to like the exact fucking correct thing that was pretty much on point with him. And the crazy thing is that you could have posted that like 10 times a day for the next 30 days. And people just would have told you were a piece of shit.
Right.
And like, that is magic. Right. You literally there's proof that these motherfuckers are using occultism. Fuck you. You're a socialist. You're a communist. You must be working for China. What the fuck?
Without any of the context, that's exactly what they can believe too. Even though theosophy is really at the root of all of this stuff. And the idea that they can control people using their own religions and use it against them. And what do we see the neocons trying to do today? Well, they've got Zionist Christianity, and it's funneling everybody back into that same sort of globalist moniker. And unless you know that, Israel is created by the people who have basically taken over our foreign policy establishment through Council on Foreign Relations, Fabian Society, you're going to be lost in the sauce entirely. So there's missing context, and what does Richard Grove always call it? The neglected aspect fallacy.
Yeah, right on. And actually, it's funny you mentioned Zionism, because that was something that popped up in this book quite a few times that I wasn't expecting.
Really?
So one of the key ones was there's a guy, John Maynard Keynes. Have you heard of this guy? He was a British economist, and he basically designed the economic system that we kind of live in now. It's called Keynesian economics. And if you go to university or college, you're probably going to get some version of Keynesian economics, even though it's been sort of updated and messed with since then. But he sort of masterminded it. And the idea that he came up with was, and sold to all the elite people he was hobnobbing with, was deficit spending, right? And so he was doing his thing around the time that the Britain came off the gold standard. And there's even an anecdote in a Rothschild book, this one. So this is Lord Rothschild's one of Lord Rothschild's memoirs. And he talks about meeting Keynes, and Keynes told him that we wouldn't be coming off the gold standard. And then a week later we did. And he went up to confront Keynes and say, hey, you got it wrong. And he said, yeah, well, what are you going to do, basically? But this guy, it says on his Wikipedia that he was a Zionist, right there on Wikipedia. And then there's another guy, Felix Frankfurter. He was a Supreme Court justice over on your side of the pond. He had a very merry band of young lawyers that he called, what was it? Felix's Happy Hot Dogs, or something like that. Okay. Needless to say, he had a very unhappy marriage and no children. But Keynes, like, for one guy, he was living his whole life, and he had this kind of mythic status, like he was a hero. People would just worship him and say, this guy's so amazing. And if you can't understand what he's talking about, it's because you're a dumbass. And they make it so convoluted. But all he was doing was just saying, well, why don't you just borrow loads more money off my buddies over here, the Rothschilds, and pay it back in the future? Don't worry about, just get the future generations to pay it back. So if you want to know like why the economy is the way it is, why the debt is the way it is, this book fills in a lot of that narrative as well.
Yeah, it's so funny that people have this conception of money like it's actually a real thing. Money is, I mean, we live in the attention economy, and even saying attention economy, people don't fully get it, but it's always been an attention economy. That's something that's come to the forefront, but it's always been there in the background. And as long as they can get you using their money, using their value, basically, they can control you. Like I recently found out that theology comes from the words Thea and Logos, right? And so Thea is this goddess of value. She's married to Hyperion, this other Titan. And what she was supposed to do is give all of the metals and all of the precious gems intrinsic value with her eyes, which goes directly into all this Keynesian stuff. So they're describing subjective value thousands of years ago in Greece. And, you've got all these economists taking credit for that now. But Thea, Logos, would be the reason behind the goddess. And what they found today is that these institutions are now their form of value. And that's one thing you could say about the left is they've turned government into a religion. And by abstracting these concepts from ancient Greece into, the management of government, you could see their religious devotion to it, and unfortunately, it's a lot more boring than ancient religions. You don't see these people, doing the same kind of rituals or anything like that, other than when they go out on the streets and have their little protests,
The ritual is they put an X in a box every now and again.
Right. And, so we end up getting behind the ball thinking that, we can decode this stuff and then figure, no, it's already been decoded. They've already put it into practice. It's already in play. This is why we have the religious institution now merging with government. There's never really been a difference between church and state. And this idea that there is a separation of church and state is so far beyond like expired by now, but the only people talking about it are the ones who are saying mud democracy, so at the same time that they're saying there's a separation of church and state, they've turned the state into their institution of church. It is a cult of state, which was very common back in the ancient Roman days, is cults of state.
Well, I would even say technically, as long as we have been, if we were really not putting those two together, would we have ever been giving Israel money for anything, really?
No.
Like, especially right now. Because that is kind of borderline, kind of like a religious thing.
Oh, it absolutely
I'm
is.
saying? So I'm like, it's, it's funny how, this is okay.
Right. The eschatology of the Christian religion has always favored Judaism. You go back to the Council of Nicaea, right? And in the Council of Nicaea, there was this period where this Roman emperor started passing a bunch of laws about, if you're a pagan, you get executed. If you're a Jew, however, you get to sit in your own form of governance. They had their own governed bodies back then. But, this is why you have ghettos for Jews today. Well, not today, but, back in World War II. And there were no pagan ghettos, because all the pagans were killed off, but they had to preserve the Jewish race for eschatology. So you've got this constant cycle of, we've got to preserve them because at the end times, they're going to be there. So we have to continue this religion, even though we don't believe in it. And it's a really interesting picture because that sort of same idea gets played out over and over again. We have to make ourselves sort of this essential quality so that people don't get rid of us. And you look at the institutions today, the FBI, like Trump wants to give the FBI a brand new building, and he thinks that's going to fix the FBI because, you've got to curry favor with these people. And it's this constant cycle of we have to keep them around because if we don't, then they could, screw things up for our future plans. It doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to be institutionalized, basically, in our own country for the purpose of one day achieving something. It doesn't have to work like that, but that's the constant sort of eschatological push, is like, at the end times, we're going to need them around. So let's preserve this today. It's craziness.
You know, it was weird. And like, I was like assuming maybe I was taking it the wrong way, or I don't know, but you mentioned like what Jewish ghetto before, right?
Right.
When I was in Rome, like on the map, there was a section of Rome that said like Jewish ghetto. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yep. They had their own governance structure.
I gotta be misunderstanding that. Like, it can't be really meaning what I'm
right.
thinking.
So
You know?
when they passed the laws, they said that Jews get self-rule anywhere they are in Europe. So all of these Jewish ghettos were actually run by the rabbis, which is what started the whole push towards what's it called? Secular Judaism, right? I can't say I'm a secular Christian. You can't say you're a secular Buddhist, right? Mm. These things don't exist. But the reason why secular Judaism exists is because of the fact that they were so sick of being ruled by the rabbis that they wanted to get out from under that system. But at the same time, they wanted to identify themselves as Jews so they could have the benefits of self-rule. So you look at the big push during the mid-1800s for secular Judaism, and who's behind it? It's all the communists. The biggest secular Jew there was Karl Marx, right? And then that push became, socialism in the United States. And it's like, how is this working that people don't see these patterns? Well, they're just not interested. They've got their own lives going on. And if they're told something about it that kind of makes sense, they just forget about it.
I wonder if like those are the type of Jews that were in MK Ultra that came over from the concentration camps. Well, you even had Jews over there killing Jews themselves. They were Nazis.
George Soros was selling out other Jews to the Nazis as a way of making money for him and his uncle, right? And he didn't see any problem with it. He was interviewed by 2020 about that, and he's like, that was the best time in my life. And nobody really had any questions after that. But the whole idea there is that the secular Jews decided that this rabbi way of life is not working for us. We cannot be under the rabbis anymore, and we need to modernize. But they never really lost the connection, because what brings all of these groups, this is what secular Jews say, what brings all of these groups together is the oppression. So we have to keep the victim mentality and the oppression all the time, and that's what unites us as a people. And when you think about that, it's really not hard to understand how, the slaughter could be happening in Israel, is because the one thing that brought all of these groups together over and over again was their victimhood mentality. And so we have to stop the next Holocaust. Whatever that is, we have to stop it.
And that's the documentary Defamation, isn't it, as well?
That is.
And absolutely. It talks about exactly how they get just bombarded with this narrative of the rest of the world hates us, and we have to stick together and defend ourselves. And if we're not vigilant, we're going to be wiped out. And that's what every other group wants. So you're a part of they're after us and they want to kill us. And it's just, it's like traumatizing the youth into this victim narrative, so that's all. I mean, imagine the psychological shadow work it would take to overcome and get out of that. Be intense, especially when they get it so young. So great point.
And what do they say when you jump ship? Oh, you're a self-hating Jew. You hate yourself. Like, there's no winning.
You're not black.
Right.
Something I did want to kind of, I guess, ask, and I guess this is kind of even why I was interested in them a little bit. I think even like the Frankists, I had even thought the same thing about like, do you think it's possible that may not, let's say it's not necessarily them, but their ideology or their goal, do you think that's actually being pursued still nowadays by the way the world's going between both of you?
Well,
I want to go first, Headless.
Yeah. So I think that the Frankist mentality was, again, back to the Fabian model. It was one of penetration. They wanted to penetrate the institutions and take them over from the inside. The reason why they were so much more successful is because they didn't have any scruples or any sort of moral objection to lying, stealing, killing to get what they wanted. right? And that's sort of the whole idea behind the Sabbatean Frankist model is we have to do bad to do good. And all we see since that time is the constant push. We have to do bad to do good. We have to vote for the lesser of two evils, right? And maybe the lesser of two evils is that one person dies instead of a whole nation of people have to die. And we see the same constant push of this mentality. So yeah, I think it's alive and well in the form of we have to do bad to do good. And we see it all over our country all the time. We just can't really recognize it as well.
Yeah, to my mind, so I don't know so much in detail about the Frankists. I was thinking about the Frankfurt School. I don't know if they're connected.
Very similar.
Yes.
But I know that like there's a part in Rose Martin's book where the Frankfurt School basically gets shut down and everyone working there gets exiled. And the Fabian socialists put them up in England. Like, hey, come over here. We'll set up a place for you in London. You can carry on doing what you're doing. But everything you just described there, Headless, to me sounds like relativism. It's moral relativism. It's kind of like, well, the ends justify the means. So if you've got to, like you say, well, if it's a case of killing these people or this people, well, we've got to kill that one because, and that's just an endless route to kind of despair and pain and suffering, because we can't all, each of us, just create our own moral code. It's never going to work like that, because what happens when you get into like the pre-crime sort of world that we're getting into now, where AI is scanning you and it's going to be, oh, look, you're going to commit a crime probably because our software says so we're going to arrest you, which is in the film Minority Report. I'm sure you'll be familiar with Tom Cruise. But did you know the Minority Report was a document written by Beatrice Webb, who was a founder of the Fabian Society? She wrote that she was hired to write a document called the Minority Report on the Poor Law in the UK, and it was all about reforming the state's attitude towards poor people. And I was like, that was another mind-blowing moment for me. So I was like, Minority Report? I never heard of that other than the Tom Cruise movie.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think there's this. So, for instance, like in today's world, we have to completely re-examine our concept of a Messiah character, right? What is a Messiah character there to do? And as soon as we see these Messiahs pop up, that's the question we need to be asking, because if it's a legitimate person who is authentic in their belief systems, the first thing they're going to tell you is not, we have to do bad to do good. But it seems like all the messiahs we get are, we have to do bad to do good, which directly goes back to 1666 and that whole Messiah movement in Gaza. Well, Nathan of Gaza was the puppet master behind the character of the Messiah, which was Sabbatai Zevi. Right. And so he was the one sort of pulling the strings, and Sabbatai Zevi was kind of a crazy person. Like people have looked back on him now and they're like, yeah, he's clearly bipolar and crazy, and all the things he's saying doesn't make a lot of sense. But, they have this connection to this idea of messianism, and they had been kicked out of Spain and a lot of the people down in the Turkish region. The Turks said, yeah, if you got kicked out of Spain, come on down here. And so they were sort of welcoming. And at the same time, there was an animosity there. It's like, we can't allow any of these people to rule us anymore. And that Sabbatean movement really started the push towards Zionism back in 1666. And you see it popping up with, what's his name? The French dictator. What's his name? Can't believe I'm blanking. Napoleon. Napoleon proposed the same plan that was proposed in the document by the letter to Parliament.
Balfour Declaration.
Yeah, Balfour Declaration. It was the same plan. Right. It's how are these people, writing this stuff up and not knowing the history that happened maybe 100 years before that?
That's interesting.
But Balfour 100 is a very interesting website. If you guys check it out, they still have the videos up
recently. I thought Richard Grove tried to get it up on Grand Theft World and it had gone. I might be mistaken.
No, they took it down. Well, I'm not surprised.
What was some of the with this book? Try to get back to the book a little bit too before we wrap it up. But when it came to this book, like, what were some of the things? I guess the highlights. I mean, I do have two I want to mention. I forgot to mention at the beginning. I do have like his whole series link in the bottom too, just on this book. So it's a nice and easy YouTube link down there if you want to just check out this series. But like, what's kind of like maybe some of like the aha moments, like you were even saying before, like wow, like I guess overall, if you don't mind.
So in the very introductory video, because I'm not an expert on anything, right? I'm very much just a guy with a bunch of books, and I'm learning my way forward. And I thought, let's do it on video and bring people along for the ride, right? So I had a look at the Wikipedia page, with the caveat that Wikipedia is not something to rely upon, but I look at Wikipedia as what I'm supposed to think about a topic. Okay, what the establishment want me to think, or what most mainstream people probably think, because a lot of people just check that and then go about their day, don't they? So I went there first, and I looked at socialism, and I looked at communism, and what I found was that socialism and communism are the same thing, at least in their initial conceptions. By like Lenin, he said socialism is the transitory phase from between capitalism and communism, right? And then Marx, he used the words socialism and communism just interchangeably. And what also tied into that was how they both require centralization of power. It's about going against Christianity, removing the individuality, the rights of the individual versus the collective. And you need this kind of, it's all about growing the state apparatus, and having more top-down centralized control, which another word for that is technocracy. Technocracy is another thing that I've been very interested in recently. So what kind of blew my mind was how socialism, communism, technocracy, and then ultimately one world government are all part of the same agenda. They're all part of the same push and drive and that's rolling out and that we're living through. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that it's planned, and it's been planned for a long time. So it fits in with other books that I've read on the channel, such as The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells, which is a very short book. But in that, he's talking about a world commonwealth, and he's talking again about top-down control and centralization of power. Another book, Bertrand Russell, Has Man a Future, which is all about nuclear war, and putting the argument forward that, we got these bombs, they're really bad, they're going to kill everyone. The only way to prevent it is world government. You guessed it, right? So the thing that's blowing my mind as I'm reading this is like, oh, there's all these books and pamphlets and publications about world government. And yet, if you go and say that to somebody, they'll be like, hey, you crazy conspiracy theorist, you've just been watching too much Alex Jones. That's not happening. It's like they've been publishing books about this for literally hundreds of years, man. And you can buy them for like £10 or $10 or something online. Like this Margaret Cole one, Story of the Fabian Society, it's like £10. It's nothing. And that's an incredible bit of history, because at the back of it, it has the basis, which is kind of the mission statement of the Fabian Society. And the first line of that is, we are all socialists. And then the Fabian Society is made up of socialists. And then later on, it says, we want to abolish private property. Literally those words, and you tell people there's an agenda to do this and they don't believe you. And then you say, well, it's written down in that book by that group, and you can see the lineage. And so what the big takeaway for me was that it explained the economic situation that we're living through, why there's so much bureaucracy and confounding red tape to go through. Like, I'm in the process of buying a house at the moment. It's the most like, they treat you like you're guilty until proven innocent. It's like you've always got to prove your innocence, and the money has come from the play. You earned it, like it's legal money that you have got fairly through employment. And you have to prove all these things and your identity, and it's so invasive and dehumanizing. We're in that, and we're at that state now. Where sometimes you got to use, like, maybe if you trade crypto or something, you got to scan your face with your phone and upload that as an identity thing. And they've got phone unlocking where it scans your face, and all this biometrics. All goes back to this desire to have a top-down control system, which is a digital system now, and that's going to control everybody, what they can and can't do, and who interacts with who, what they have access to. And it's the social credit score type thing. It just all fits in and fits in perfectly. And to me, this just tied all this together, and while giving me a bunch of names to learn about. So we mentioned Maynard Keynes, Felix Frankfurter was another one, Harold Lasky. and the connections with the London School of Economics. That's also been pretty powerful to learn about, because a lot of people think the London School of Economics, what a prestigious place to go to. It must be great to have governors and senators and politicians who went there and studied there. It's like, well, this London School of Economics was literally founded by eugenicists, and speaking as a Brit, 70% of their students are from overseas. So it's not even like training the people who are going to rule us here. It's training people and sending them out to the rest of the world to then become leaders in their own countries, to knit their other countries into this system that's like coming outwards from here. So that was a big game changer as well, just understanding things like the London School of Economics. And you mentioned Council on Foreign Relation, which has the Royal Institute for International Affairs, is the British side to that. They're the same institute, really, but the American version couldn't have royal in the title. So they had to call it the CFR, right? And that came out of, there's actually a part in this book, talks about 1919, the peace conference at the end of World War I, and how you had Colonel Edward Mandell House, and he was the kind of whisperer into, was it Woodrow Wilson? That yep. he had a strange relationship with, didn't they? They spoke as one voice, and he was like the handler. But anyway, when the outcome of the Paris Agreement wasn't so satisfactory and the League of Nations wasn't taking off because America didn't want to get involved, Mandell House got together with a bunch of other people, and that is what led to the formation of Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So that giving me the origin story of these think tanks, these groups, and these institutions. That's been a real game changer for just understanding how it's perpetuated and how it keeps going.
Yeah, a lot of times I think you get a lot of different groups or a lot of these think tanks. It's just like, well, we would just want a different name to keep doing something else, or it's just you almost like start to see, I think, a spider web, which kind of really gives you maybe the true intentions of everything that's going on.
Yeah, definitely, I think so, and they overlap. And there's this revolving door, and it's a similar kind of thing. It's like with government, you have, the Minister of Health, and then the Minister of Health goes to work for, pharmaceutical giant, and then the Minister of Agriculture then goes to work for Monsanto, for example. And it's that same sort of revolving door, except in this book, it's more focusing on university professors and these thinkers and authors. So H.G. Wells, you've got the Huxleys, the whole Huxley family, Julian Huxley, he's in there. George Orwell is actually named in this book as being a member of the group, which was, I didn't realize he was in the group, but H.G. Wells was in there for a little while. He's actually on the stained glass window that they made as well, the infamous stained glass window. He's at the bottom. He's doing a kind of like trumpet thing with his fingers. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean, but he's there. So these household names as well that I grew up with, being because my major at university was English literature, so I'm a big reader, and I grew up with these names: H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell and Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, classics, and then you realize why they're classics, why they're putting them on the reading curriculum for every school and university. It's because it's the plan. Like you were saying before, sometimes they got a signpost like, hey, we're doing this, not so overtly like, hey, we're doing this, but kind of like, well, we told you and you didn't stop us, so it's kind of your fault.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is we're always supposed to be rebelling against the last enemy, right? We're not supposed to be rebelling against the next enemy, but we're supposed to be rebelling against the last enemy. So they constantly put out books like, Brave New World and 1984, and they say, isn't it great? We can all breathe a sigh of relief that this did not come to pass. And these were the bad guys. These were the autocrats, but we're the loving ones. And they've got this constant revolving door of these people going through these institutions, becoming Rhodes Scholars, becoming, fellows at the London School of Economics. And then we don't go back to the origins of these institutions to find out it's always been corrupt. It's always been bad. And we just accept these people as our new rulers because, well, somebody's got to do it, right? It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Something like you even said with the kind of always like worrying about the last bad guy. I mean, just my opinion. I mean, like, kind of even what's going on over in Israel. It's like you took World War II and 9/11 and threw it into a blender.
Right.
And you're like, here you go, have at it, you know. And like this one, it's like your budget was even less. You had like a lawnmower and a fucking, you know, a pillowcase, and a guy floating in. Like, the fuck, you know, like guy has a lawnmower on his back and a fucking bed sheet.
The one thing that we don't talk about is how many Hamas terrorists were actually involved on 10/7. And the closest I can get is between 50 and 250 people. And so 30,000 have been slaughtered because of the actions of 50 to 250 people.
Wow.
Well, you know what?
Nobody wants to talk about that.
You know what the thing is too? I think, and I don't know, maybe because like as a kid, it was something I kind of like came to think for a little bit, I guess, due to like the news and grown-ups, because you think grown-ups know better when they say things. Like some people's opinions, like, or the way they looked at it, I remember from like Desert Storm and shit like that. It's like they assumed everybody in Iraq was like born in all like hating the United States.
Right.
Like the country was just all terrorists. So like it's okay just to keep dropping bombs because they're all fucked up. Like,
right. When you get over there, you find out something very different. And I've been over to Iraq twice. And I got to say, like, they love Americans, but they hate the American government. And they have the same nuanced positions that we do. And they know that. And we know that. And when we talk with them, we get the same picture. And we're like, oh, boy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we're here. You know, we took down every single overpass in the entire country. So they don't have shit. And they've been trying to rebuild ever since, but it's no wonder why they don't have any of the refinery capacity, because anytime they get things up and running, they get bombed out. The problem isn't that there aren't enough resources. The problem is there are too many resources for them to monopolize all of them. So they've got to destroy a lot more than they build. And we're in that sort of contraction, that destruction phase right now, because if we're allowed to produce for ourselves, we get out of their trap. And this goes back to the attention thing. As long as we're paying attention to the political leaders and the political drama, we're not producing the type of resources that are going to lead to our independence. So keeping that in mind and moving forward is definitely the way to go, because there's nothing the Fabians the Fabians are still around. People don't, really realize that. They're still around. They're still influencing politics. They're still hugely involved on the left. And yet we focus on them instead of actually building for ourselves,
That's a really good point. And I think, to tie it into the book, and as you mentioned, the Fabians are still around. I saw a picture of Keir Starmer, who's the current leader of the British Labour Party, giving a speech to them. And right now we're coming up for a selection. It's going to happen on July the 4th, which I hear is an important date over there in the States. But like he's still being influenced and giving speeches at this organization. So yeah, they're very much still active. But what I've learned from this book is what they really want is the opposite of what you just said. They want dependence. They want you to be so dependent on mummy government, daddy government to provide everything, to tell you what to do, sit down, stand up, buy this, have that. You can have this much meat and you can have this much cricket flour to make your bread. And it's about keeping people in this perpetual, never-ending state of childishness and adolescence, where you're always looking to the authority and you're never like looking in and thinking, okay, what is the right thing for me to do according to my own conscience? How can I be useful to the people around me? How can we grow some food together? How can we figure out who fixes things and pool our resources? Like if you live on a street full of houses with gardens, you only really need one lawnmower for the whole street, but everyone's got a lawnmower and everyone's got a copy of all this stuff in their home, in their little castle where they're cut off and separate. And that's where they want you. They want you at home, suckling on the teat of this like fear drip of information that comes through all the time, and just being very dependent. And so anything you can do to
never have enough too.
Yeah, fear. Yeah, exactly. The scarcity mindset and worrying all the time, and that's what we're up against. Is like, okay, like you said, if we pay less attention to them, it will just starve the cancer and it'll just dry up and go away, because we start building community and building relationships in the real world. And I think part of the problem that sometimes we might have, just using the we for like the conspiracy kind of crew and community, is that we can, or at least I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for the community, but I'll speak for myself. Is sometimes I feel like I'm in a different world to some of the people around me that I see maybe day to day, or, you know, I don't want to use all the usual words, normie, sheep, and all that, because it's not. It's just, but it is for feeling like I'm in one reality where we know about Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes scholarships and the roundtable groups and the CFR. We know about all that stuff, and that's history. And they're in government is fantastic and democracy is wonderful land. And you know, the Arabs are evil, and we got to support Israel to kill them. And and it's just two different worlds, and bridging that gap is, I think, the most difficult thing, but it's the most worthwhile thing as well to do.
Right. I think that's the difference between messianism and having a practical application, is that in the practical application, people copy you because of your success. In the messianic version, they're always following you because of the promises you've made and never fulfill, you know?
Right.
I like that.
Good distinction. Yeah, definitely.
Something I wanted to make sure I brought up and asked, not to put you on the spot. I know you had mentioned earlier, you mentioned something about like Frankfurt University. I know not the same topic, it wasn't the Fabian Society, but like when I covered the Frankists, I had started to realize, and I think you had mentioned it earlier, and you mentioned something about professors, which is what made me want to bring this up. When you were kind of like going through this book or even other stuff on the Fabian Society, did you find like specific schools? Because like when we covered the Frankists, what I was going to say is like we actually found like universities in the United States that were like specifically sending, like depending on what program you were in, you would go over, and a lot of times it was Go Eighth University in Frankfurt. Okay. They were sending their students, and it's crazy thing is it's these universities that look like they're totally like a church, like Catholic, like so religious, and then like for 9 months they will send the students over to like there, which is like far left, you know. And like I think that was like kind of like a way that some of these people were getting indoctrinated kind of like into that, or if they were already into it, they already knew like this is, you know, the route to go. So like we actually came across like specific universities and schools that you could see like, you know, the United States is sending there to like, you know, that are into this shit. Did you find anything like that specifically, like still today, when you were covering this or reading up on this topic?
Not specific to today, but certainly Cambridge and Oxford, they pop up all the time. You know, big Oxford specifically with the Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholars. But the London School of Economics was definitely the key one, because Harold Lasky, who was teaching there, who was an open eugenicist, open communist, called for violent revolution here in England, he actually mentored the Kennedys, which is quite a revelation, the Kennedy brothers. And there's some discrepancy because the book claims that JFK was there for 2 years, whereas the Wikipedia claims that he wanted to go there and study under Harold Lasky, but he got sick, he got a bad tummy, and then so he stayed and studied something else somewhere else. I think he went to Switzerland or somewhere, according to the Wikipedia. So there's a discrepancy, but certainly pulling people in, and I always have to use the word grooming because it seems the most appropriate word. It often seems to be grooming and getting these young talented people and pulling them into their groups, societies, and then just training them and telling them, I think, that you are born to control the other people. You're of a different class, you're of a different stock, because it's very much driven by this eugenic or kind of outlook of like we're training the managers of the human herd, or the farmers or the shepherds of the human herd. But really just Cambridge, London School of Economics, and Oxford.
Well, one of them, I think, is Stacey Abrams, right? So Stacey Abrams went over there and trained with, you know, the Rhodes Scholarship, all of this other stuff. And what she always does is she comes in as the spoiler, right? So her goal is not necessarily to win anything, but to always throw a monkey wrench that results in the agenda being pushed forward. So you could see her as a community organizer who basically pushed forward the agenda that the state was going to do anyway. And by having her there, you know, it sort of shifted the focus away from what they were going to do anyway. And now it's, you know, this is a big victory for Stacey Abrams. And so the whole election accountability thing and how we're going to make sure that nobody has an ID to come vote, that was all sort of like a big Stacey Abrams push. And alongside those lines, you also have Kamala Harris, who was heavily involved with this this weird group out in California. We covered this on the show, this Templar group, right?
What? That was one of the original shows you came on and did, I think. Yeah.
Right. And so this Templar group that she's involved with is like pretending to be police officers.
Yeah. Yo, they had like the cars, the uniforms, the get up and everything.
Right.
And they, like, they tried to like go over to the police precinct that was like closest to them and be like, well, since we're cops too now, like we should be like kind of like, I guess talking back and forth. And they're like, who are you?
Right.
The Masons.
So yeah, there's so many different groups like this, and it seems like it would be hard to keep track. Like all of these different groups, it seems like they would be hard to keep track. But the personnel choices always means that it's moving in a certain direction, right? Yeah. So if you can choose the most unscrupulous, you're always going to have this sort of slide through, decentralized individuals and into this collectivized form, because most bad people are cowards and they have to clump together, Yeah, that's something to keep in mind.
And that's something actually that I've been trying to put into my videos. And when I'm talking about this group, I hate to use the elite, or these other monikers. I'm like, I just call them the usually cowardly parasite class, because they're the two functions really. They're cowards and they're parasites. They just attach themselves and they just soak up and live off the labor and the work and the energy of regular people. So that's the best way to describe them in my book. And I think I really like the energy. The way we're talking about them here is not with the kind of like fear, and it's like you got to laugh at them, you got to look at them, shine a light on them, notice the patterns, know what the groups are. So when you see a Rhodes Scholar, you can go, oh, actually I know about Cecil Rhodes, and I know about the 7 or 8 wills that he created and the purpose of the Rhodes Scholarship, and how Lord Rothschild was the executor of the will, and you can fill in that context, which is why Richard Grove's work's so good, because he helps you, it gives you that context. But then you can engage with this material from a position of kind of a knowing. It's empowering, and it's not sort of fear-based. It's more kind of like, oh well, I can see it and I'm not scared of it, so let's move on and keep talking about it and keep shining the light on it.
Right. I think we're at the breaking point in the tide. They're going to have to start replacing some of the characters that they've put up in front of us, because the vast majority have run their course. I mean, look at
Klaus Schwab resign.
Right. Klaus Schwab resigned. Chris Cuomo is disgraced. All of these media personalities and these figures are all basically bankrupt when it comes to any authenticity. So they're going to have a huge replacement of this, basically commentary.
Kissinger died, didn't he?
Well, even think in the next 20 years in our own lifetime, you know how many political people will actually see die of old age?
Right.
There's actually going to be a lot of people that are going to change throughout our lifetime, and that could really start making things interesting depending on who takes over.
So I have a question then. When in terms of like who's going to take over to keep people like us, because they'll want to throw people like us off the scent a little bit. They can't be just rolling out more Rhodes Scholars and more LSE graduates. Where do you think these new people who are going to replace, are they going to come from? Maybe the
TikTok influencers.
Yeah, I was going to say something like that.
They've already started trying. If you look at Sam Bankman-Fried, you've got this guy who, he comes from a family of bankers, and he's indoctrinated into this effective altruism. And this effective altruism is definitely part of this next plan. So what I think is going to happen is they're going to start pulling from the crypto community. They're going to start pulling from all of these areas where, you have the unscrupulous, it's a new frontier, and they can put them in charge of that new frontier. Unfortunately, we know the names of their organizations. They're going to have to come up with more of them, or else, they're not going to have any credibility right off the bat. And they know that they need at least 3 or 4 months of credibility before they lose it all. And unfortunately, that 3 or 4 month time window is still intact. If we could change that to maybe a week, it's like, we've got your number. And Milei is a good example in Argentina. It's like within about a week, people are like, no, this guy's fake. This guy's fake. And nobody wanted to listen. And so he gets elected, and what do we see? Inflation going through the roof for the Argentinians again. And, I think his time's up. So they've got to come up with something else. But the time window is very important. I think of it like a chessboard or a game board, right? They've got to be able to control the clock. And if they can't control the clock, if we control the clock, and we could say, no, this guy's out of bounds, we're not going to accept that. Then they've got problems on their hands. So we can control our attention spans. We can control the game clock. And that's something important to just keep in mind for all of it.
Nice. Well said.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I think with that, if you guys don't mind, I think we'll wrap it up. We're about at a minute, hour and 20 minutes. Thank you both for coming on, and thank you everybody in the chat. That's what's up. There was a lot of people in the chat, a lot of good stuff. Before we wrap it up, I want to let you guys both plug your shows again. Headless, did I let everybody know where they can find your stuff?
Check me out on Instagram and Twitter. I'm at Headless Giant, and I've got a lot more stuff coming.
Yes, and check out Spaces. And what is that? Every Friday night?
Friday night. Yep.
Yeah, I think they had 10 p.m. Eastern, I think, on my end.
10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. Yep.
Awesome. Yes, definitely check that out. Some pretty cool stuff going on in there. And Nick, thank you so much, man, for coming on. That was a really good chat. It was great. And I kind of figured when I asked you to come on, even though it was your first time, I was like, I think this is going to go really well. And I'm really glad I had you come on, and hopefully have you back on in the future. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff and and all that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on. I very much enjoyed it too, and I've got a lot of books to read, so I'm sure we'll find a fertile ground for further discussions in the future. But I go by Hayes Reviews, and that's on. If you type in Hayes Reviews, as you can see it under my name there, that's on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Instagram, and Twitter. I think that's it. But I'm kind of new to all of them except YouTube, so there's not a lot of stuff there at the minute. But I do also have a Telegram group chat. And as I mentioned before, we have a chat going in there where I poll the group to see what books to read next. So if you want to get involved in the study session, the learning journey, and have a steer of the Hayes Review ship, then feel free to join the Telegram group. There's a really good chat in there. It's very much similar to the kind of topics we've been talking about today, helping each other fill in the blanks and make connections. I tend to share as well if I find good deals on books. So if there's any other bibliophiles out there who are, I have a bit of an obsession now with trolling the internet to find these books when they're cheap and they're good prices. And if I've already got a copy, I'll stick it on the group and say, hey, someone else can buy this. But if I don't have a copy yet, I'll buy it and not tell anyone. But that's just snooze you lose, isn't it? So yeah, Hayes Reviews on all those platforms, and I look forward to talking to you guys again. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you. Their links are in the bottom now for both Headless and Nick. Again, thank you everybody in the chat. That's why I try to go live. I appreciate it. If you're catching this, I highly suggest you check out the live chat if you're watching it on YouTube. That is the end of another Occult Rejects, and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.